Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Better Show. It's just me today, just Ian, but I'm here with a very, very special guest. His name is Kevin Hancock, and as you probably heard in my pre-recorded biography intro of Kevin that you already have gone through, he's an impressive guy. He is a man of industry. He is the CEO of a long-standing family company up in Maine, my neck of the woods. I grew up in upstate New York. Kevin and I were just chatting before the show. And he's here today to talk about his new book, which is The Seventh Power. So welcome to the Better Show, Kevin.
It's my pleasure, Ian. Thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Actually, I heard that it is actually your birthday. And is this true?
It is true. Today is my birthday.
I was telling Kevin, this is the first time we've had a guest on the Better Show on his or her birthday. So thank you again. That's really generous of you to make time on your birthday.
Yeah, well, one of my favorite things to share is an idea. So taking time today to be with you is actually a treat for me.
I love that. And actually, one of the quotes that I pulled from your book that you say right up front in the beginning, I loved this. You said, your three favorite things to share are a smile, a hug, and an idea. And I was thinking, it is getting a little crazy out there with the COVID, pandemic. So maybe we can't share a hug at this moment, but we can certainly do two of the other ones, the smile and the idea. So
exactly.
Yeah. Great.
Yes.
Well, I came across Kevin's 2019 TEDx talk called The Business of Shared Leadership, a CEO's Quest to Disperse Power. I was absolutely blown away by it, Kevin, and really inspired by it, and very, very happy that you're here to talk about your book. So I think as we do every episode, I would like to start with, why does it matter? Why should we care about shared leadership?
Right. I love that you start your shows that way. And I think that question really gets right to the heart of the very essence of the Better Show, which is an interest in awareness, an interest in self-development and improvement, and a desire to make things better. Being conscious of change and improvement is such an essential ingredient in helping society evolve. And so to this subject, I think you really start right at the beginning and say, well, does leadership matter? I think you start with that. And I think, particularly right now in these challenging times, I think everyone would agree that leadership matters. And when you think about the COVID-19 challenge and you ask the question, well, who's going to have to lead on this challenge?
Right.
The answer is obvious. Everybody. It is going to take everybody to lead. So I think leadership matters, and I have come to believe that the best way to lead is in a shared way where power is distributed and everyone is helping to lead.
I really love that. And it is very true. I think we're all starting to feel that right now. I mean, the COVID example is the topic du jour. It's the thing of today, but it will be something else in 5 years, right? But it is very tangible for us all right now to feel that we can't just rely on someone else to solve this for us, right? It is up to every one of us in a way. So that example really resonates with me. One thing that I wanted to follow up with was why is it so hard for us to disperse power in organizations? One thing that I love as a thing you say in the book, and quoting you, is you say it's meant to be dispersed. And so when I read that, I think it should be natural for us, yet it feels like it's difficult for people. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think that's a great question. And I think the answer to it is in three parts: momentum, ego, and then thinking about followership. So let's start with momentum. The first reason shared leadership is a bit difficult is because humanity has gone through generations upon generations of a different type of leadership model that is built on collecting power to the center. Historically, the way you gained power and led was by collecting it, and the more you collected, the more control and influence you had. But in the 21st century, that script is not working that well. I think people can see, I believe, organizations globally are in a bit of a slump when you look at their actual performance versus their peak potential performance. And I think this is the reason why. The second part of it to me is ego. I know when I was a younger manager, I've been at this for a while, but a younger manager and leader, I really confused my own ego with my role, and I really often got caught up in thinking that my own self-worth or my own value was a function of my leadership role and my leadership power. And so I think it takes leaders letting go of ego and separating ego from role in order to disperse power. But then finally, I would say that that followership is a bit of a reason why shared leadership is a challenging subject. Humanity, I think, has been indoctrinated over hundreds and hundreds of years into the art of followership, which is expecting not to lead, expecting someone else to have control. And for leadership to change and for power to be dispersed, not collected, followership has also got to change.
Interesting. Okay, so there's really kind of three components to that. It's a complex thing. Interesting. One thing I was curious on is what role do you think that trust plays in making the transition to shared leadership? Bosses have to trust their employees, but don't employees have to have a leap of faith to make here as well?
Yes, I think trust plays a big role. So again, to me, the fundamental concept behind shared leadership is that power is meant to be dispersed, and that organizations and society as a whole can function more optimally and effectively if everybody shares that responsibility. But it really takes a bit of awareness to even start thinking about that, which goes right back to the fundamental idea of your show. You've really got to be willing to stop and think about leadership and how it's traditionally functioned and how it's fitting today, the 21st century. And as humanity evolves, it would really be silly to say that leadership doesn't need to change.
Right.
Of course it does. Everything's changing, and leadership has to change as well. But I think in general, it's a subject that hasn't gotten enough thought from enough people.
Yeah, I think that's what struck me when I heard your TEDx talk was, this is a topic that more people need to be talking about. And so I'm glad that we can play a little bit of a role in that and get more people to start having a conversation about it. And I think your book does a great job at this too. Okay, so my takeaway is it matters, shared leadership matters because literally society would all function a bit better if we took this approach. That's my key takeaway, and who wouldn't want that, right? So I'm kind of curious, if we move into personal experiences, when did you become aware of the importance of shared leadership? And was there some kind of memorable moment that inspired you to take this cause up? Because you were leading a busy life, you had a lot on your plate. Why would you go do this?
Yes, there really are four dates that created big change in my life, and they are 1848, 2008, 2010, and 2012. So 1848 is the year our company began doing business. I'm part of the sixth generation of my family to work for our company. We're a forest products company. And in 2008, the housing and mortgage markets collapsed. And I remember in our market, the housing starts shrunk by 66% in 36 months, and our sales fell by 50% in 36 months. It was an economic tsunami. In 2010, Ian, at the peak of that collapse, I began to have trouble speaking. I hadn't connected that problem at the time with the economic challenge, but in hindsight, it's totally connected to me in terms of the pressure I felt during that period. But anyway, turns out I acquired a rare neurological voice disorder called spasmodic dysphonia that made speaking at times extremely difficult. So there I was as CEO trying to help a lumber company through the collapse of the housing market without the consistent use of my voice. And I laugh about this now, but at the time I said, well, what possible good could a CEO be who can't talk all the time?
Right.
Because really, in some ways, as a CEO, my voice had been my primary tool. But it was really interesting, Ian, when it's suddenly difficult to talk, you develop strategies for doing less of it. And my primary strategy was to answer a question with a question, thereby putting the conversation right back on the other person. So someone would come up to me at work with a question or a problem because I was the CEO or the boss, and previously I would have provided an answer and a direction. But now, because of my voice, I started simply saying, wow, that is a good question. What do you think we should do about it?
I loved this part of the book. I thought it was so smart of you, and it both helps you personally in that moment with your speaking, struggles, but it also helps you start to disperse power, right? Like, isn't that the side effect of that?
That is exactly what happened. So initially, this was just a voice protection exercise for me. But after months of doing this, what struck me that was so intriguing, not surprising, but intriguing, was that people already knew what to do. They didn't actually need, it turned out, a CEO or management top-down solution to the vast majority of the challenges they faced. They actually already knew what to do. All they needed was encouragement and a safe work culture to trust their own voice and do it. Now, to really build on this, in 2012, I began traveling somewhat serendipitously from Maine, where I live, to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in the southwest corner of South Dakota, which is the largest, poorest, most historic, most remote of all the Sioux reservations on the northern plains. It's a place I've now been over 20 times and have lots of friends there. But there, Ian, what struck me is I encountered an entire community that did not feel fully heard, in part because of how they had been treated and how those leaders who had the most power, which was a non-reservation at the time, white America during Western expansion
Right.
had overrun them, that they felt like a piece of their voice was missing. And putting the two together, I had 5 personal learnings. First, from my own voice disorder, I understood what it was like to not feel heard. I actually knew what that felt like. Second, at Pine Ridge, I really realized what may seem obvious, but that there are lots of ways for humans to lose a piece of their voice in this world. And that third, perhaps, I started thinking about that unanswerable question, the very meaning or purpose of a life on Earth, and concluded from that paradigm that perhaps it was to self-actualize. Perhaps what every human had in common is that we were all here just trying to find our own true voice, to know it, to live it, to love it, and to gift it with confidence to the collective consciousness of humanity. But point number 4, across time, when I got thinking about leadership, I concluded, unfortunately, that on average or in total, across human history, leaders had probably done a lot more to restrict or limit or intimidate or direct the voices of others than to free them, which is then finally when it hit me that perhaps the partial limitations of my own voice, which I'd only previously thought of as a hindrance or a liability or quite literally a pain in the neck, were perhaps a blessing or an invitation to lead differently, because I was in a position of leadership, and perhaps the limits on my own voice could be leveraged to strengthen the voices of others. And that's when I got really excited about this idea of, well, what if everybody led? What if everybody shared the responsibility of leadership? And what if central leadership's role was to give others a voice?
Right.
What might that look and feel like?
Yeah, that, when you listen to Kevin's story or you read the book, one of the things I think that is so striking, and I'm sure you must feel this having lived it, is it feels like such opposing opposites when you talk about, where you are in Maine running a lumber company as a CEO of a family company for, 100 plus years. And then you're talking about going to, across the country to an Indian reservation, right? After you have this crazy thing happen to you where you lose your voice, like all these things seem to indicate that there has to be some reason this is all coming together, right? Like you must have a lot of stuff going through your head. And it's really inspiring to me that someone that I think, so just to make it very personal as well for me, like I'm 32. We talk about in our show where we're at in our lives all the time, and I'm building a career, and I got married a year ago, and the listeners know this kind of stuff and anecdotes that I've talked about. But, you do always have, and I think everybody can relate to this, you always have that feeling in the back of your head as you go through life that, opportunities are closing, or maybe you're just getting more and more defined into what you maybe were trying to aspire to or what life has thrown at you. And I think what's inspiring about your story is you were very far down that road, right? Like you had a family company that you were destined to run. I mean, you mentioned in the book that you took that over, I think literally the age I am now, 32, when your father passed away. And then to be in the midst of that, to go through the financial struggles in the markets and all that stress, to have a personal medical issue, but then to go from that and say, I'm going to change the way I do things. I'm going to introspect. I'm going to write a book. Like I just want to say it's very inspiring that when you are that far down the path in life, and I don't mean that in a like you're an old way. I mean it in a like
no, I know.
Your destiny was well on its way. Like it's just inspiring that you took the time to do this. So I just want to say thank you first off, and for sharing your story. I would love to move into what we always call the meat of the show, which is our tips and tricks and hacks, and really start to help listeners understand in their own lives how can we start to implement some of what you're talking about. So I will start with a really simple one. How can we get better at shared leadership?
Yeah, that's an important question. And I think the good news, Ian, is all that we have to do is contemplate the possibility of it and make it a priority. I've come to believe, which is the fun part, that sharing leadership is much easier than not sharing it. Think about it that way. I've kind of flipped it inside out and think about all the structure and control that has to be in place to not share leadership.
Right.
That's actually hard to do. Sharing leadership, really, when you contemplate it, is easier. It's intuitive. It benefits everybody. And it's not a complicated exercise. Collecting leadership is complicated. Sharing it is not. And I do talk in the book, you reference this, about the epiphany moment for me on this subject. Had been thinking about these ideas now for a few years, and I was walking one night in the Arizona desert north of Phoenix at sunset when the epiphany I'd been searching for came to me in the form of 5 simple words, and they stopped me in my tracks. Those words were, in nature, power is dispersed. And I stopped and I surveyed that desert scene and then began posing out loud. This would have made you smile, Ian. I began posing out loud a series of leadership questions to the desert itself. I said, where's the... You know. Exactly. Yeah, I said, where's the capital of this desert?
Right.
Where's its headquarters? Where's its corporate governing center? Where's the CEO? Where are the managers and the supervisors? Which one of these cactus is in charge of all the others? And the answer to every question was crystal clear. In nature, leadership, the responsibility for the flow of nature, is scattered and diffused. It lives in every part of nature, big and small. The minute we contemplate that, we know that to be true. Then the second key awareness is to remind ourselves that humans are a part of nature, not separate from it or above it. We are a part of it, and humans ultimately aspire to organize in this same way. So sharing leadership, to me, is the organizational equivalent of synchronizing how we organize and lead in the pattern that nature naturally flows in.
Wow, that is, yeah. I remember hearing that the story in Arizona, and I did my honeymoon there, and I was thinking about that, the cactuses and seeing the nature out there and how it all runs itself is another way I would say it, right? It runs itself. There's no board of directors out there making the calls. So I'm curious, is this something that you think we can only do in business, or could this be applied in personal life or government or communities or even families?
Right. That's a great set of questions too. And I think the answers here are self-evident. I ended up writing about this in a business book context, partly because the publishing world wants everything in a box, but then partly because that was my real life example. We went to work implementing this approach at our company of 550 people. But it is self-evident to me that that same approach would be optimal in all aspects of personal life and collective life, whether it is government, community, family. We have two young adult daughters in their 20s, and for parents, just think about the power of shared leadership in terms of parenting and imparting individual responsibility onto your children versus the consequences of not doing that. And what I really think is happening here in the 21st century, which is super exciting, that we're all alive here now with opportunity, is I think there is a planetary human awakening unfolding. I believe that humanity for centuries has been organizationally centric, meaning the individual was indoctrinated into the art of serving the empire, whether it be the country, the nation state, the religion, the corporation, or the school. Right. But in the 21st century, I believe more and more individuals are awakening to their own sacred power that lives within us all. And that institutions have become slow to respond to this and adjust. It's a simple but massive shift. The old model, the individual was small before the institution. In the new model, the institution ideally is made small before the individual. The institution serves the individual, and then that in turn engenders loyalty and commitment from the individual back on the institution. But you do it by giving away power, not collect it.
Right. Yeah, I actually wanted to quote you from the book. This is for listeners. This is from the chapter titled Evan's Notebook. And you say, quote, "The idea is to turn the corporation inside out. In the old model, employees were commodities that sacrificed and served the organization. In the new model, the organization becomes a conduit for serving individuals." Is there anything you want to speak to with that part? I thought that really resonated with me. It just made it so crystal clear in terms of you're flipping the model.
Correct. In a way that actually will improve the performance of the business, but as the outcome of a higher calling. Now,
right.
Now look today at engagement at work, and you can see why this is so important. So across America, 180 million people work, but less than a third of them will describe that experience as personally meaningful or engaging beyond just an economic exercise. So engagement levels are super low, and globally, the data gets even worse. Globally, 3 billion people work, and less than 2 in 10 consider it engaging. And so you've got this overwhelming evidence that people who work are looking for something more meaningful, something that's going to serve them on a spiritual, personal growth level. But that requires organizations making the individual employee experience a top priority. And what we essentially decided to do at our company is flip that script. And we ended up actually, Ian, changing the very mission of the company. So our mission now at Hancock Lumber is first to be meaningful to the people who work here, meaningful and valuable to the people who work here. So if you picture a flywheel, a business flywheel with all the constituents, employees, customers, suppliers, community, and the company itself. Our focus has been to put that flywheel in motion at the point of the employee experience. Not so that the business will do better, but because these are human beings investing a massive part of their life at work, and you want that experience to be meaningful. This will increase profit and corporate performance, but in its place as the outcome of a higher calling. So I'm really calling on business to take a step back and revisit its very mission and purpose.
Yeah, that's powerful. One of the things in the book that Kevin has is, as you read through it, is every chapter ends with a lesson of 7 that he has throughout the book in the age of shared leadership. I don't want to give it all away, Kevin. I want to make sure people go read the book, but I'm kind of curious, out of the 7, is there one that really, kind of struck you the most or surprised you, or I'm just kind of curious if one of the lessons really stands out to you that you would want to share with the listeners.
Yeah, well, one that came to mind as I was listening to you is simply this, and the lesson is listening is for understanding, not judgment. So we're talking about creating a culture where everyone feels heard, trusted, respected, valued, and heard. When I was younger, as a zealous, hardworking manager, I think in hindsight, I often listened so as to evaluate whether or not I personally approved of that other person's perspective. And if I didn't, to prepare to correct them, if you will. And I think that's such a not cool approach in the 21st century, counterproductive approach. And so what we've really tried to do at Hancock Lumber is encourage our managers and leaders to listen for understanding, that there are no wrong answers. When someone says something, they're simply saying what they honestly feel or think at that moment in time. And the truth of the company is the collective set of all voices. And think about the power, potential power of making it safe in a family, a school, a society, or a company, making it safe for people to actually say what they really think.
Yeah, what's funny? I just flipped to that part of the book, the listening part, and there was a thing I highlighted in bright, bold highlighter. You say this quote, "It's restraint that deepens engagement." And that one hit me. I was like, wow. So saying less can deepen my engagement sometimes. That one was fascinating, and it ties into the listening more than talking sometimes.
Yeah, I love that you pulled that out exactly. So what we try to do now when someone says something is to simply say, thank you for sharing that. Or if it wasn't clear, to say, thank you for sharing that. Could you tell us more about that? It used to be, if you picture, don't want to pick on a culture, but if you picture, let's just take an example. If you picture North Korea and an entire military parade where everyone is reciting the same words and making the same salute, that's not alignment. And an extreme example, that's coercion. Right. And in an extreme example, everybody understands that. Well, pull that back to business. I think that old model was we all think the same way, we say the same thing, and we go at it the same way. And again, that wasn't alignment either. That was coercion. That's what that was. And what a company really needs is for everybody to talk about the company as they're experiencing it. And that's actually, to bring it to the bigger purpose, I think what the planet needs. There's a question on the back cover of my book that's really become the motivating question for me and my pursuit to improve and grow. And that question is this, Ian: what if everybody on Earth felt trusted, respected, valued, and heard? What might change?
A whole lot.
I think, yes, Ian, it's so everyone who contemplates that question says what you just said. Everything would change. Everything would change. And all it takes to facilitate that or move down that path is leadership restraint, which is respect for all voices. We have millions of trees in the forests that we manage, and there never will be two of them that are identical.
Right.
And the same is true with humans. Even identical twins do not have identical voices. Humans are not meant to have identical voices.
That's right.
It's been a primitive approach to leadership that has pursued that objective, which in the 21st century, we've outgrown that. Humans know it, and organizations are starting to wake up to it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as we wrap up, I had a couple questions I wanted to end with. One is, on our show, we always kind of try to end with one thing that everyone listening can do today to enable, the cause or to get better at the thing. In this instance, I'm kind of curious, is there one thing that you would recommend when somebody hits stop on this little podcast and they take off their headphones? What's that thing that they should go do to help enable shared leadership in their organization, in their life?
There is one thing, and to me, and it might surprise you where I'm going to go with this. Where I'm going to go with this is that one thing is for each of us to make more time and focus to turn inward and listen to our own true voice. This is where it starts. It's to really start to break some of our own patterns and look within ourselves and seek and embrace and dare to release our own true voice. That change starts from within. Once you move down that path, I believe our collective willingness to support others along that same path will flow from it. The first obligation we have is to seek, know, love, and release our own true voices.
And that sounds like it mimics your own story a little bit. I think that's maybe how you started, when you started to listen to your own voice a little more.
What happened?
I am very curious, when you went through the process of writing this book, and it wasn't Kevin's first. He had another great book before this one. Anything really surprise you in the process of either researching or writing this book?
Well, two things. The first was, to me, the beauty of writing, or the beauty of going on an adventure of learning, is the biggest beneficiary is the person who does it. If when I wrote the book, the only thing I did was took the manuscript in my basement and put it on the shelf, it would have been so worth it, because I learned and I grew and I changed, and that's what I really wrote about, and then just decided to share it. So first was the personal learning, but second, and I suspect honestly this is a big part of what struck you and and inspired you to track me down is these messages are actually super timely right now.
Yeah.
And they're universal. And the only reason I feel comfortable saying that is I really feel like it was the gift of a higher energy, or my own soul, or my spirit guides, that gave me my voice disorder, which I've come to see as a blessing, which kicked me off center, forced me to look inward and change, and set me down a path. That was a gift to me. But what really has motivated me now, having been given that gift, is I think it's super timely, and its messages are universal, and there's a critical mass of people on this planet that these messages resonate with right now.
It's yes, 100% yes. I have nothing to add there. One last quick thing. I'm always curious. Was there anything you weren't able to include in the book that, for whatever reason, that you found interesting that you might want to share?
Yeah, I touched on it in the book, but not enough, and I'm actually contemplating whether or not it is the next book. And the concept is this: the Sioux tribes, the Lakota at Pine Ridge on the reservation, have a philosophy of connectivity that they describe as mitakie oiasin, which translated means we're all brothers, or all things are one thing, or everything is related. The basic idea there is that everything that exists, whether it's a tree or a buffalo or a human, is made up of the same sacred stardust, and it's all related and connected. But if you look at the way humanity has evolved to date, it's been very tribal.
Right.
And I think the reason we're hitting a kind of a big struggle or pivot point in human history in the 21st century is that Sioux wisdom or prophecy is coming back to surface. Today, tribalism does not work. Isolation does not work because there's no ability to isolate. Today, our biggest challenges and opportunities are global, but all of our governing systems are tribal and local. When I leave the Pine Ridge Reservation heading west, as I usually do, I hit a line in the middle of the sea of grass where I'm being told I'm leaving South Dakota and I'm entering Wyoming. And I stop every time. There's not another car or person in sight. And I picture a Sioux tribe moving across the plains with the seasons and the buffalo, say in the 1860s, coming to the welcome to Wyoming sign.
Right.
And pausing to contemplate the potential of a line there. That line, like almost every other, is a human construct. It's not real. But we've built our house of cards on these lines, and it's a problem. And the other way I'm thinking about it's a problem today. And the other way I'm thinking about that, Ian, is that humans were very good at constructing empires.
Right.
But what we've now got to do thoughtfully is deconstruct them. So the word deconstruction is very much on my mind. And what's striking me first about that is that that's not going to be an easy exercise. So that's kind of where my head and heart are going next when I think about humanity.
That sounds exciting. I would read that in an instant. Please write that book.
Thank you.
You know, it reminded me, and I'll maybe close with this. It reminded me in the introduction of the book, you talk about this story where you were at a gala for the internationally renowned Seeds of Peace camp in New York City. And you talk about how, former Vice President, now candidate Joe Biden, he takes the stage and he has this quote that you put in the book. He says, "Any conflict is nothing more than a loss of personal relationship." And then you go in and follow it and you say it reminded you of the words of a Navajo peacemaker. And the quote from that was, "We must understand that we are related to every person and every creature we see, but then we must honor our responsibilities to those relationships." And I loved that part. That's another one that I bolded and highlighted, and it just spoke to me. But it seems kind of related to what you were just talking about. So it's a nice way to wrap it up.
Totally. I'm so glad you referenced that, and it reminds me of that. One of my favorite quotes. I forget who said it, but the quote is this: "When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change." And that's where, maybe to lead this back with you, I think your show is so important. The very title to me is just compelling and perfect. The better show that starts with an awareness of we can do better. And that doesn't have to be an indictment on the past. The past was the best we could do at that moment in time. But what's critical is that we all recognize that we can do better, and that we all go to work on how we personally can lead that transformation in a way that's true to our individually unique and beautiful voices. So your show, I love being on this show, and I love the mission of your show, and I'm really glad we're connected.
Well, as we said at the top of the show, Kevin's favorite three things are a smile, a hug, and an idea. And if you could see my face right now, there's a giant smile all over it. You have given me plenty of ideas, and I think our listeners plenty of ideas to think about. The book is The Seventh Power: One CEO's Journey into the Business of Shared Leadership. Our guest was Kevin Hancock. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. And I always tell this to guests, especially if you've just went through the process of writing a book. Thank you for taking the time to get your thoughts on the page, to organize them, and to share them with the world, because it also is a mountain of work to write a book.
Ian, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.